neighborhood blocked off with hundreds of law enforcement. And about 8 hours later, officials say they dismantled a decade-long, 24 hours more to come.
And I will say to anyone out there,
picture this. A midnight convoy of roaring Harley-Davidsons cuts through the dusty back roads of Texas, their red tail lights flickering like warning signals. Inside those metal steeds sits an unlikely hostage, a woman the DEA once dubbed the She-Devil of Juarez, a cartel queen whose chilling crimes ranged from illegal C-sections to organ harvesting and the trafficking of newborns for a fortune in cash. In the blink of an eye, the outlaw biker gang that has been on the FBI's radar for decades, the Hells Angels, snatches her from the grip of a powerful Mexican cartel. This isn't a scene from a Hollywood thriller. It's the viral footage that has sent shock waves through law enforcement worldwide, a stark reminder that the line between biker myth and brutal reality can blur in an instant. With a $200 million ransom on the line and a cross-border power struggle involving cartels, governments, and ruthless bikers, the stakes have never been higher. In today's video, we break down the night that changed everything, the daring raid, the hidden motives, and the fallout that will echo in the halls of both Mexican cartels and U.S. law enforcement agencies. Stay tuned as we uncover how the Hells Angels pulled off one of the most audacious captures of the most wanted narco figures in Texas. In the dim glow of a midnight Texas back road, a convoy of Harley-Davidson motorcycles thundered through dust and gun smoke, their red tail lights flickering like the pulse of a heart in distress. The footage that exploded across the internet never seemed to belong to a choreographed stunt. It felt raw, unfiltered, and unmistakably real. But the shock did not come from the roar of the engines or the stark landscape. It came from what the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club had seized in the darkness. Mexico's most infamous narco queen, La Diaba, a woman whose reign of terror had haunted border communities for years. Martha Alicia Mendez Aguila, known in cartel circles as Lady Diabla, had built a grotesque empire that defied the conventional image of a drug lord. The United States National Counterterrorism Center and Mexican law enforcement reported that her operation was not about moving meth, cocaine, or cash. It was about moving life itself. Her network, backed by the CJNG's Jalisco Nova generation, targeted vulnerable expectant mothers along the U.S. Mexico border, luring them with promises of shelter, medical care, and a better future. Instead, these women were subjected to illegal C-sections, their organs harvested, and their newborns sold to couples in the United States for up to $250,000 Mexican pesos, roughly $13,000 each. Authorities believed that over 40 babies were trafficked through her network, creating a business that raked in millions for the cartel. The operation's brutality reached a crescendo when Mexican Marines raided her compound in September 2025. The raid was expected to be the final blow. Yet, Lady Diabla vanished. Rumors swirled that she bribed local officials, slipped across the border disguised as a nun, and resurfaced weeks later somewhere between El Paso and Midland, Texas. This area, long rumored to be under the influence of outlaw bikers tied to cartel operations, became the stage for a drama no one anticipated. By early October, encrypted telegram channels buzzed with whispers of a violent showdown in rural Texas. Locals near Sonora reported motorcycle convoys, foreign-looking vehicles, and the unmistakable crack of automatic gunfire echoing through the oil fields. Anonymous photos began circulating online, a woman tied with zip ties surrounded by men in biker vests, the death's head insignia of the Hells Angels emblazoned on their jackets. The image was chilling, yet the story seemed implausible. Why would a gang already under federal scrutiny capture a cartel operative worth more to the DEA than to themselves? The second leak, a handwritten letter allegedly sent to Mexican officials, demanded $200 million from the CJNG and its allies for the safe return of their queen. The letter's authenticity was never verified, but its presence suggested a mix of vigilante justice and high-stakes extortion that blurred the lines between crime, politics, and law enforcement. The FBI's El Paso field office had been coordinating with Mexican authorities on Lady Diabla's apprehension since late August. A federal warrant sealed under counterterrorism provisions listed her as a foreign terror associate, part of the Trump administration's February 2025 order labeling the CJNG a foreign terrorist organization. Under anti-terror statutes, any U.S. citizen or group engaging with her could technically fall under criminal charges. Yet, when the Hells Angels first entered the scene, everything changed. An insider hinted that the bikers did not stumble upon her by accident, they had been tipped off. Perhaps an informant within law enforcement had provided intelligence, or perhaps a disgruntled cartel operative sought a third party to neutralize her. The Hells Angels' history with Mexican cartels complicates this narrative. For decades, they have acted as distributors and enforcers for both Sinaloa and CJNG traffickers. In Canada, they smuggled cocaine through ports used by Sinaloa. In Arizona, they moved meth for the CJNG. However, kidnapping a cartel queen would be unprecedented, a strategic pivot that raised questions about motive, alliances, and power. What likely transpired in Texas can be reconstructed from intercepted communications and biker social media claims. Lady Aba was ambushed outside a stash house near Odessa, where she had been hiding under the alias Maria Lopez. A convoy of about a dozen bikers reportedly boxed her SUV after midnight, smashed windows, and pulled her out before local police could intervene. She was taken to an undisclosed ranch, part of a network of Hells Angels safe houses spanning Midland to San Angelo, where armed guards held her under tight surveillance. If the account is accurate, the capture was not merely a punitive act, it was a calculated move to leverage her influence and to force the CJNG into a vulnerable position. The $200 million demand hinted that the Hells Angels sought compensation for the risk they assumed and perhaps to demonstrate their growing power beyond mere drug trafficking. The letter's demand also suggested that the Hells Angels were positioning themselves as an alternative to the cartels, willing to negotiate in the murky world of organized crime to protect their interests. The cross-border power struggle that unfolded thereafter was a complex dance of force, negotiation, and desperation. The CJNG, with its decentralized cells, had built a structure that made it difficult for law enforcement to dismantle the entire organization. While drug trafficking remained the cartel's primary revenue stream, it had diversified into human trafficking, fuel theft, illegal logging, and, most disturbingly, infant trafficking and organ harvesting. This diversification was not merely opportunistic, it created multiple revenue streams, increased resilience to law enforcement pressure, and enabled sophisticated money laundering operations that blurred the lines between legitimate and illicit businesses. In Martha's case, the infant trafficking operation was reportedly used to launder money through seemingly legitimate adoption-related transactions. Buyers would believe they were participating in illegal, if questionable, adoption, while the cartel benefited from a clean flow of funds. The babies were presented with fraudulent documentation, and the money would flow back into the CJNG, cleaned of its bloody origins. This made tracing the flow of illicit funds extremely difficult for authorities, as the financial trails were masked by the veneer of legitimate transactions. For many in Mexico, Laba became the embodiment of pure evil. A woman whose crimes blurred the line between narrow terrorism and human cruelty. Her operation had exposed the darkest corners of desperation and exploitation, revealing a level of violence that few could have imagined. In the borderlands, her name became a whispered legend, a cautionary tale of how human need could be turned into a weapon of state-level terror. The Hells Angels' intervention, whether a calculated betrayal or an opportunistic move, reshaped the power dynamics along the border. They had moved from being peripheral enforcers to active participants in the cartel's most lucrative and horrific venture.
Kensington blocks.
Their capture of Lady Diabla forced the CJNG to confront a new threat, a rival capable of infiltrating the cartel's inner circle and demanding a ransom that could cripple their operations. The $200 million demanded by the Hells Angels was not just a financial figure, it was a statement. It sent a clear message to the CJNG and to other cartels that the bikers had the reach and resolve to strike at the heart of their organization. Whether they intended to ransom her back to the cartel or to keep her as a bargaining chip remained unclear, but the act alone destabilized the already volatile balance of power in the region. The story of Lady Diabla and the Hells Angels' midnight raid illustrates how violence, ambition, and desperation intertwine in the borderlands. It shows how a woman could conceive of a business model that turned the most vulnerable, expectant mothers, into commodities, extracting profit from every organ and every newborn. It demonstrates how an outlaw motorcycle club, traditionally associated with biker culture, could become a formidable player in a transnational criminal network, capable of executing a high-risk kidnapping and demanding a ransom that could cripple the cartel's finances. The aftermath of the capture has yet to fully unfold. Law enforcement agencies, the cartel, and the motorcycle club all continue to navigate a precarious landscape where alliances shift like sand. The $200 million demand, whether fulfilled or not, has already left an indelible mark on the narrative. It has turned a once-hidden operation into a public spectacle, forcing both sides to confront the limits of their power and the moral lines they are willing to cross. In the end, the story of Lady Diabla is a stark reminder of the brutality that can lurk in the shadows of border towns and the unpredictable players who can rise to shape the violence that defines this region. It is a narrative that refuses to be neatly categorized, a tale of how desperation, greed, and a ruthless quest for power can combine to create a nightmare that extends beyond drug trafficking into the realm of human life itself. The Midnight Convoy, the Hells Angels' sudden intervention, and the $200 million demand all serve as chilling symbols of a world where the cost of survival can be paid in human lives and where the battle for control over such lives can spill into the darkest corners of organized crime. The moment the word captured began to ripple through the feeds, it set off a chain reaction that no one in the borderlands had prepared for. The images that surfaced, grainy, shuttered, half-masked, were all anyone could see in the first hour. A woman in a white surgical mask, wrists bound with gauze, flanked by men in plain clothing whose faces were obscured by shadows and the low hum of a motorcycle chain. The picture was released by an unidentified source that claimed it was a secure federal photo, but the details embedded in its metadata told a more intricate story than any official headline could capture. Within minutes, the chatter on Twitter and Reddit exploded into a chorus of theories. Was the Angels convoy a front for a clandestine federal operation? Had the bikers simply decided to pull a vigilante play that embarrassed both the U.S. and Mexican governments? Or had the Hells Angels acted alone, a rogue element of a global syndicate, taking a most wanted narco queen into their own hands? The sheer volume of speculation pushed the story onto the front pages of every major outlet. One headline that caught my eye read, Hells Angels hand over most wanted narco queen, and another, Texas agencies scramble to understand Angel's bold move. Every cable panel that night dissected the blurred image, a half-covered face, a medical mask over the mouth, white gauze wrapped around both wrists. The metadata placed her in Fort Stockton, Texas, a stone's throw from the last known location of the Angels motorcycle convoy, a detail that both supported and complicated the official narrative. While the feeds filled with memes and sensationalist commentary, behind the scenes a quiet, disciplined operation unfolded. The FBI, the DEA, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and the Mexican Special Forces had all been watching the Angels' movements for weeks. The Angels' West Texas chapter, which had a long-standing relationship with several criminal networks, had not merely acted on impulse. The capture was the culmination of an intricate intelligence pipeline that stretched from the Canadian chapters of the Angels to the methamphetamine supply chains of the CJNG. An inside source, a former Angels member who had turned informant a year earlier, revealed that the Angels' capture was the product of a month-long surveillance operation. The Angels had been monitoring the patterns of Martha Alicia Mendoza Aguilar, the woman who had taken on the moniker Lady Diablo, in the cartel's darkest underworld. She had been a conduit between the CJNG's meth supply in Canada and the distribution network that the Angels operated across North America. The Angels, with their vast global reach, over 60 chapters in more than 100 countries, had long cultivated these ties to secure a foothold in one of the world's most violent cartels' heartlands. Through a covert collaboration with a former CJNG informant, the Angels gained knowledge of Martha's routines. They learned that she was typically moved at night, preferring the relative anonymity of the Chihuahuan Desert's winding roads. The Angels exploited this pattern. A single well-timed convoy of black motorcycles and SUVs, unmarked and unregistered, rolled into Fort Stockton at a time when CBP scanners recorded a brief digital spike consistent with encrypted radio traffic used by CJNG units. Hours later, the convoy vanished, leaving only a faint trail of tire marks and a handful of drones overhead. The Angels' tactical execution mirrored the precision of a military raid rather than a biker's vigilante swagger. A black SUV crew, equipped with high-frequency radios and the stealth of a private convoy, waited in the shadows. They waited for the signal, the lull in the ambient traffic, and then struck. Inside the SUV, a small but loud explosion detonated on the Mexican side of the Rio Grande, a signal that the cartel's special forces had attempted, perhaps to retrieve their missing queen, and failed. The FBI declined to comment, but forums and analyst blogs converged on the same conclusion. The Angels had extracted Lady Diablo, but whether they were collaborating with federal agents or simply exercising their own brand of justice remains a contentious question. Parallel to this on-ground drama, diplomatic channels were fraying. Mexico's government, stunned by the fact that a most wanted narco trafficker was reportedly in U.S. custody, demanded a formal extradition from what they called illegal civilian hands. The Mexican Special Forces had massed across the border near Oinaga, satellite imagery confirming armored convoys idling in the heat, engines humming with the weight of anticipation. Whether they intended to rescue Martha or to eliminate her was unclear. The tension between the two nations was palpable, a silent standoff that stretched across the dusty plains of Fort Stockton to the bustling streets of Guadalajara, a city that had become a crossroad for both Angels and CJNG operations. The Angels' capture had, for the first time in a decade, forced the world to see the extent of Martha's reach. Intelligence reports had long hinted at a cartel's diversification, from drugs to humans, from smuggling to terror financing. Martha was the embodiment of that shift. She had orchestrated a clandestine network that wove together narcotics, human trafficking, and terror funding across borders. By taking her into U.S. custody, the Angels inadvertently, if not deliberately, unveiled the cartel's pivot into the most lethal dimensions of organized crime.
And Roman Montañez. The indictment says they flaunted their enterprise like a successful business, even writing down work schedules.
Behind the scenes, the National Counterterrorism Center had been quietly analyzing the encrypted radio traffic that surfaced during the Angels' operation. Their analysts noted a digital spike that matched the encrypted protocols used by CJNG units, suggesting that the cartel had at least attempted to coordinate a rescue. A convoy of black SUVs, possibly carrying firearms and explosives, had been spotted near Presidio, heading toward the border with the speed of a desperate getaway. That convoy had been intercepted by the FBI's undercover unit Operation Crimson Halo, deployed along Interstate 20. The unit, comprising U.S. Marshals, was trained to intercept any attempt by cartel gunmen to cross into Texas and retrieve their missing queen. The Angels' move also sparked a global manhunt that extended beyond the borders of Texas. The FBI, DEA, U.S. Marshals, and Mexican Special Forces all found themselves in a tense choreography. The DEA's intelligence wing was pulling out its own resources, coordinating with CBP and the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, while the NCTC, often a silent partner in counterterrorism, began issuing internal briefings about the potential terror financing links the Angels had uncovered through Martha's interrogation. Rumors swirled in the dark of late October. A small container, an old shipping box repurposed into a makeshift holding cell, had been photographed by a local journalist near the Angels' convoy. Inside, Martha allegedly underwent an interrogation that felt more like a ritual than a conventional police procedure. Some said she had been filmed, a video broadcast on a private forum, where she allegedly offered a confession that hinted at her involvement in the human drug nexus that the cartel had cultivated. Her medical mask, the white gauze on her wrists, the plainclothed men around her, it all seemed like a staged tableau designed to send a message to both the cartels and the public. The motive behind the Angels' bold act remains shrouded in ambiguity. One line of speculation leans toward the ransom. The Angels had demanded a staggering $10 million, the sum of 200 lives and a single human heart. A figure that threatened the financial stability of CJNG, whose coffers were already stretched thin by the global drug trade. The demand was not merely a financial calculation, it was a psychological blow to the cartel's pride, a public testament that even the most feared criminal kingpins could be brought low. Another perspective frames the Angels' action as a vendetta. The Angels had been expanding aggressively into Latin America, establishing chapters in cities like Guadalajara, directly under CJNG's sphere of influence. Their business partnership with CJNG's methamphetamine supply chain had once been profitable, but the growing tensions over distribution rights and territorial claims had escalated. Some insiders suggest that the Angels felt cheated, stripped of their access to supplies as the cartel began to diversify into human trafficking. In retaliation, they took a most wanted narco queen into their own custody, not for money, but for leverage. The third angle, perhaps the most chilling, is that the Angels used the capture to expose a hidden war. They had, through their transnational chapters, tapped into a network of drug traffickers, human traffickers, and even terror financiers. By bringing Martha into U.S. custody, they forced both the cartel and the government to confront the reality that the border's most profitable crime was no longer just smuggling. It was a confluence of drug trafficking, human exploitation, and covert financing of violent extremism. The Angels' action inadvertently exposed a secret infrastructure that had remained hidden in the shadows of cartel operations. The diplomatic fallout was swift. Mexico's government issued a formal statement demanding the extradition of Martha from U.S. civilian custody, a request that the U.S. authorities handled with the delicacy of a sovereign crisis. The statement was clear: "We demand the return of Martha Alicia Mendez Aguilar, who is in illegal U.S. civilian custody." The U.S. response was measured, citing the lack of evidence that the Angels had acted with federal permission. Yet the public, the press, and the criminal underworld watched closely. The Angels' convoy had vanished 2 nights earlier. The federal press image was taken in Fort Stockton, a stone's throw away. It was a perfect narrative of a secret exchange, a covert handover, or perhaps a strategic smokescreen. As the days passed, the global manhunt intensified. The FBI's Office of Intelligence, in collaboration with the DEA and Mexican Special Forces, began coordinating surveillance across key corridors. They monitored not only Interstate 20 but also the remote Big Bend area, where the Angels had previously established a safe house. Satellite imagery of the border region showed armored convoys idling, engines running, an ominous silence that spoke of an impending operation, whether to retrieve or to silence. Late in the night, a convoy of black SUVs made their way to Presidio, heading toward the border with the speed of a desperate getaway. Operation Crimson Halo intercepted the convoy, and the convoy's contents were revealed: firearms, explosives, and the unmistakable smell of terror. The Angels' private convoy had been built with a level of sophistication that blurred the line between outlawry and military operation. At the same time, whispers from the underworld spoke of a second wave. The Angels' private convoy had, after taking Martha, moved her to a secure location, a hidden safe house in a remote part of Texas that was only accessible by a network of private roads known only to the Angels. From there, the Angels' own private intelligence gathered details about the cartel's operations. Martha's interrogation had yielded information about the cartel supply chain, and more importantly, about the covert networks that had been siphoning funds into terror plots. The data had been shared, secretly, with the U.S. agencies, but the manner in which it was shared raised questions. Was the Angels' action a prelude to a larger operation? Were they acting as a private intelligence agency, or was this a purely criminal venture? The question is moot when the data revealed that the Angels had the same encrypted protocols that the cartel used. The line between counterterrorism and criminal intelligence had blurred to a point where the Angels' operations resembled those of a private intelligence agency, albeit with a very different motive. All of this had one consequence: a new paradigm in the fight against organized crime. The Angels' capture forced the cartel, the government, and the public to recognize that the most powerful criminal kingpins were no longer merely drug traffickers. They were, in essence, the architects of a larger, more complex system. By extracting Lady Diablo, the Angels had taken a powerful weapon, a human heart, and placed it into the hands of a system that now had to confront the reality that the most powerful crime was not just smuggling, but a convergence of drug, human trafficking, and covert financing of violent extremism. The story remains unsolved. The motive remains unclear. But the narrative remains. The Angels, with their transnational network, had brought a most wanted narco queen into their own custody and in doing so, had exposed a hidden war that threatened the cartel's dominance, the nation's sovereignty, and the world's sense of security. It is a narrative that will continue to be debated for years to come, a tale of a crime so bold it was also a threat, a story that has changed the perception of how organized crime and counterterrorism intersect on the dusty plains of Texas. It's a story that remains alive, waiting for new chapters to be written, each one a testament to the complex dance between crime and the forces that seek to bring it into the light. The saga of Lady Diablo, captured by a clandestine squad of hellfire-named riders, has left both the Mexican government and U.S. authorities re-examining their priorities and their own definitions of law, power, and control. While it has set a new precedent for how the state and a rogue private force can become partners in the fight against the increasingly dangerous and complex cartel-led human drug nexus that runs through the dusty plains of Texas and the borderlands.